Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. Today it's Monday, October the 6th, 2025, and I'm about to start using this, a Raspberry Pi 500 Plus, as my only computer for 7 days. This will include editing this video on the Pi in Kdenlive, and it'll also give us the opportunity to try out a range of operating systems and applications. So let's go and get started. Greetings! Here I am at the desk where I'm going to be working most of this week. I've got the Pi 500 Plus set up over here with a monitor, as you can see. In fact, I'll probably have it in front of me to be more ergonomic like that, but if I'd got it in front of me now, you wouldn't be able to see me, so I put it over here for the purposes of recording this part of the video. Anyway, let's take a look down here at the Raspberry Pi 500 Plus, and in case you're not aware, this new keyboard computer, in addition to having a rather nice mechanical keyboard, has got 4 2.4 GHz A76 CPU cores, just like a Raspberry Pi 5, along with 16 GB of DDR4 RAM and a 256 GB NVMe SSD. And already, as you can see, it's been joined on my desk by various backup drives, a card reader, things like that I'll be using across the week, and it's also hooked up to this 24-inch monitor. If we go across to the desktop, what we're running here is the latest version of Raspberry Pi OS, based on Debian Trixie, which was released on the 2nd of October 2025. This has a fairly similar default desktop background to Raspberry Pi OS Buster, then still known as Raspbian, and it's kind of nice to have something in this new version of Raspberry Pi OS that's sort of the same but different. However, the desktop theme has been updated quite significantly. Let's bring up the file browser there and also go to the menu. We can see all the new icons in the new desktop theme. And in fact, let's compare these to the previous version of Raspberry Pi OS, which was Bookworm, and then come back to Trixie. We can see it is quite a distinct refresh. And an even more significant change is a new control center. We go to the menu here and go to Preferences. We just have in the middle Control Center like that. Whereas if we again look back to Raspberry Pi OS Bookworm, there were individual preferences applications for Raspberry Pi configuration, appearance, mouse, keyboard, screen configuration, and printer. But here in the new Control Center, all of these are brought together with these little sections down the edge. You can scroll these with your mouse like that up and down to move up and down different ones. And I should point out here that whilst what we're seeing is the defaults for large screens, I've not changed anything, save for one thing. I have changed, if we go back down to the bottom, I have changed in the theme, the font, I've made it bold, which I think makes it much clearer to see. And just to show you what the default would be like if we hadn't made it bold, let's just do that, and we get a very spindly font. They've done here, where's the menu? Come back menu, there we are. They have done here an Ubuntu. They've decided to give us a very, very spindly font for reasons that I can't possibly imagine why you want to do that. So in my view, you really do want to go down here and make the font a bit thicker. Let's just go down to the bottom and stick it back a little bit down here like that and make it bold. I find that much easier to see, although I still personally prefer the old interface font, PyBotu, and this is not included with the new version of Raspberry Pi OS Trixie. And so what I did in the previous Bookworm version of Raspberry Pi OS was to go to User, Share, Fonts and TrueType and to copy the PyBotu directory to a USB drive, and then after my new clean install, I copied that folder across to User, Share, Fonts and TrueType. And that means if we now go to Font and we search for it, Pi like that, there it is. I can select what I've used in the past. There we go, and I just happen to think that is slightly better. And one of the great things about Raspberry Pi OS is we do have this level of customization, so I'm most definitely going to use it. Anyway, everything is now basically working here in Raspberry Pi OS Trixie. I've got all the recommended software pre-installed, including things like LibreOffice, and so I'm now going to get on with some work, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Right, it's now Tuesday the 7th of October in the evening. I've been using the Pi 500 Plus all day. It's been running a good 10 to 12 hours with no problems at all. And I've mainly been working on video editing using Kdenlive, which you can see is here now in the menu. I did a sudo apt install Kdenlive in a terminal to install it. All worked absolutely fine. And you'll see we can launch it directly from the menu, no problems at all. Although to edit HD video smoothly on a Pi 5, it's a good idea to go to Settings and configure Kdenlive, and to Proxy Clips and to enable Proxy Clips, which will force Kdenlive to generate lower resolution versions of your clips to use on the timeline, but when it renders the final video, it'll use the original footage. Anyway, let's show you some of the stuff I've been working on. Here is the edit somewhere of the entire week. Here it is. This is what you've just been watching. Here's an Explaining Computers introduction, episode title, me saying hello, hello, enter title, and then stuff from yesterday with various captions like that. And to do this, I've not just been using Kdenlive, I've also been working in Audacity to clean up audio. Here's some audio. Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. All very meta in this video this week, isn't it? I think I'll close that down, don't need that anymore. No, I won't save that. And I've also been working in Photop, the fantastic online version of Photoshop, here producing some of my standard captions. This is a PSD file with different layers for different captions. And we've got different sizes of the captions as well. If we go down, we can do a double one like that. And these are exported out as PNG files to use in the file edit, as we were just seeing. And specifically, there are a couple down here. Well, there's three down there, aren't there? 1, 2, and 3. And another one down there. This all said, the edit isn't quite as straightforward as it might appear here, because what I've got here are edited together sections. And so I've actually got other edits for those particular sections. Let's just show you those if I can work a mouse. Come on, Chris, we can do it. Here is the Monday edit. This is where I took all the ProRes footage I recorded on Monday and made it into the final segment we were just looking at. There it is. And then I also had another edit for the introduction, which is a composite. Let's just bring it in from there we are. And last time I made a whole video on a Raspberry Pi, I think it was my Raspberry Pi 4 week many years ago. And then I used Blender to make the composite shot from my opening green screen footage. But today, Blender doesn't run on a Raspberry Pi 5. The Pi hasn't got appropriate GPU support for Blender anymore. You can mess around to get it working, but it's not very stable. And so I had to do my composite here in Kdenlive. And this caused me various problems. Let's show you how it progressed. Let's go to the final footage for this edit. Initially, I think that was my first attempt. Quite a lot of mess at the top, as you can see, so that was not ideal. I had another go, building things up down like that. This is better, a cleaner composite, still not perfect, probably isn't going to be perfect by the end, but it was better than the first version. And then finally, I got it to the version that'll probably be in the final edit unless I make it better between now and then. And as you can see, the top is now clear, and hopefully we'll see a caption coming up in a second. There it is. This is all here in what is probably the final file. And if we look back to Kdenlive, you can see this is working with various layers. There's a layer for the caption. We can turn that on and off. There's a layer here which does a bit of fixing. To turn this bit on and off like that, you might see the top goes a bit green there. If I turn it back on, it doesn't go a bit green. What I basically did was to go into Photop and to take a quick grab of me, which is under here, low resolution there, and to basically take the background, paint out all parts of the background I could possibly appear in, and then I drop that here back into Kdenlive to clean up the top of the shot. You have to mess around a bit to make composites really work in Kdenlive. And just to show you below that, let's turn off the top two layers. I've got two layers of green screen. This is the one at the bottom. Let's go to that and show you how it's put together. Here is the chroma key, which we can turn on and off. You don't have a lot of controls for chroma keying here in Kdenlive, so I had to be creative. But this gave me some problems at the top and some problems on the top of me as well. So what I did was to do another layer, which makes things slightly better. And that works by basically having another set of chroma key settings, and it's what's called an alpha gradient. It just does the top of the picture and helps to make things better. Anyway, the main thing I hope to have demonstrated here isn't really exactly how I put the video together so far. It is how fluidly everything's working here in Kdenlive on a Raspberry Pi 500 Plus. Let's go back to the original edit. We will not save things over there. And as we've seen, the Pi is working very fluidly. We've got no problems editing video here on a Raspberry Pi 500 Plus. Guess what? Here I am back again. It is now Wednesday in the afternoon, and yesterday we tested out the Pi 500 Plus doing some fairly heavy lifting, and so I thought today we'd focus on more bread and butter computing that's still very important. And in fact, all of this is web-based. You won't be surprised to learn you can use the Pi 500 Plus for viewing web pages. That's no problems at all. And we can also use it for viewing YouTube. Again, that gives us no trouble. Let's just bring up a video and play something and just prove that to show you it works. I've shown you this in previous Pi 500 Plus review content, but we'll do it here as well just to make the point. Bring up Stats for Nerds like that. And oh look, we had one drop frame as things started off, but after that things are playing absolutely fine. There's no issues playing HD video here on the Pi 500 Plus. I'm going to discuss my... Secondly, and for me just as importantly, there were no issues using hardware security keys. And in case you're not in the know, these are things like YubiKeys or Google Titan keys that some of us use for two-factor authentication. And these can be a bit tricky to set up in many Linux distros, including still Linux Mint, and I'm therefore very pleased to report I had no issues whatsoever setting them up here in Raspberry Pi OS Trixie on the Pi 500 Plus. They just worked straight out of the box. And to show you that, we're on one of the authentication screens we have with Yubico to test things out. So if I just click on Authenticate here, and next like that, it'll bring us up the opportunity to touch the key. If I give you a shot of this, you'll see I've also got a DataSure secure drive plugged in as well. But if I just press the YubiKey contact, there we are, it has worked. Authentication has been successful. And so there are no problems using hardware authentication keys here in Raspberry Pi OS Trixie. And for me, this is very important because it means I can get to things like my Microsoft email. Here it is. And in turn, this means I can get to all of the related Microsoft online apps. And these include things like the online version of Microsoft Word, which works absolutely fine here on the Pi 500 Plus. I've obviously been thumping the keyboard randomly here. That should be an I, shouldn't it? There we are. This works fine. And of course, I've also logged into Google Drive, where I spend a very large proportion of my life, and I've tested Google Docs, and again it worked with no problems at all. And so in practical terms I can do lots of different types of work here on the Pi 500 Plus. However, one thing worth pointing out is I'm now here logged into lots of different online accounts, and this means we've got to keep the Pi 500 Plus secure. And in that respect it's worth pointing out that by default Raspberry Pi OS does not require a password to be entered when you boot up the machine. And so what I've done here is to go down to the new control center. Here it is. And I've gone down to system there, and I have turned off console and desktop auto login, which forces us to enter a password when we boot the machine. And just to show you that, let's do a quick reboot, shut down and reboot. And we'll just speed on through until we get back to the desktop. Here we are. I now have to enter my password. There we go, and this of course means anybody who gets hold of my Raspberry Pi 500 Plus cannot just boot it up and get straight to all of my online accounts. Talking of which, I think I'm going to go back to my online account. I'm going to return to Google Docs. You've got to keep returning to Google Docs, haven't you? What would we do without Google Docs in our lives? Well, I'd be absolutely, completely lost. So anyway, I will go back to the script for this video, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Oh, hello, it's now Thursday, and I just thought I'd let you know that whilst this week I'm generally using the Pi 500 Plus at a desk, in the evenings I'm connecting it to my television. So I'm currently sitting in my living room in the evening, and my Pi 500 Plus is over there. There it is, look, connected to my television. And I'm controlling it not by its lovely clicky keyboard, but using this. This is a combined keyboard and trackpad thing which wirelessly connects currently to the Pi 500 Plus. It normally controls this computer that sits behind my television, which runs Chrome OS Flex. But I can't run Chrome OS Flex on the Pi 500 Plus because it's not available, but I can run FydeOS, which is very similar, also based on Chromium OS. So let's go across to that on the screen. Here we are running FydeOS on the Pi 500 Plus. I like FydeOS and Chrome OS Flex and all the other different variants of Chrome OS, just like you get on a Chromebook. Here is the menu over there, everything is nicely adjusted to work nicely on the television. And I'm mainly here, whilst there are various applications over there, I mainly use a browser. This is a browser-based operating system after all, and so it means I can get to things like Google Docs. Yes, I do word processing on my television. I'm always doing word processing in Google Docs, but I also use a Chromium-based operating system on my television for streaming. I use it to watch Disney Plus, as here. Been watching a lot of Agent Carter Series 2 this week for some reason. Quite like that series. And I've also been watching YouTube. I've also been checking up on my own second YouTube channel. Here it is. And in that context, I've also been checking up on comments on my latest video. Here are some more comments on one of my latest videos. Let's read more. Always good to see what people are saying. So anyway, I think I will get on reading and responding to these, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Greetings! Here we are on Friday, and in this week in which I'm doing all of my computing on the Pi 500 Plus, I thought you might be wondering about the phone I'm using. And it is this one, my AGM M8 rugged flip phone. There we go, and I can make calls on this and get text, but it's got no internet capabilities, and so I am doing all of my computing on the Pi 500 Plus. However, enough of such matters, because far more exciting is this. We're running Ubuntu on the Pi, and not just any version of Ubuntu, but Ubuntu 25.10. And this was released yesterday, as we can see in the release statement here. And Ubuntu 25.10, requesting Quokka, is not a long-term support release. The next one of those is Ubuntu 26.04 in April 2026. And so Ubuntu 22.10 only has 9 months of support. But it's still an interesting release to look at, as it showcases things to come. And whilst it's not officially certified for the Pi 500 Plus, the Pi 5 is certified, the 400 is, but not the 500 and the 500 Plus, I've had no problems running it on the Pi 500 Plus. And note, we're running it from an external SSD, with Raspberry Pi OS still on the internal SSD, that's why I've got so many SSD icons over here, and I've also still got FydeOS on a microSD card. In terms of look and feel, I do prefer Ubuntu to Raspberry Pi OS. However, it is a little bit more sluggish. Indeed, if we go back to the web and we go to YouTube and we bring up my standard test clip, you can probably see here we do have some drop frames, quite a few drop frames, so it's not ideal compared to Raspberry Pi OS if you want to do things like while streaming media. Anyway, let's get rid of that like that and go back to a desktop, because as you may have noticed, I've installed Kdenlive. So let's run it up. I've brought all the files across from the edit so we can have a look at those here in Ubuntu. There we are. Let's go to the Open Recent. There is the edit. It is now a bit bigger than it was last time you saw it, because of course more days have passed and I've been keeping up. And it says it's not responding. It is responding, it's just loading in a much larger file. And as I said, Ubuntu is not quite as responsive as Raspberry Pi OS. There we are. But as you can see, the edit is here. There's yesterday, look. And there's the day before and the day before. It all works here in Ubuntu in Kdenlive. But as I say, it's not quite as responsive as using Kdenlive in Raspberry Pi OS. Anyway, I can't continue to work on this right now because it's a Friday, and because it's a Friday, it's the day I release an update for my channel members. And I've been writing the channel member update here. It's got a picture of the Pi running Ubuntu, and so I think I've got this all written correctly, at least I hope I have. So I'm not going to release this post, just check it's all for channel members. I always get that wrong. Yes, it is for channel members. There we are. So I will post the post like that. Oh, there's last week's post. That's very exciting, isn't it? It's all doing its stuff. There we are. I think it's done its thing. Has it done its thing and come up appropriately? Looks like it has, hasn't it? No problem at all doing YouTube stuff here on the Pi 500. So there we are. I will now go back to the desktop. I probably will go back to Kdenlive, and I will talk to you again tomorrow. Greetings. It's now Saturday, the 11th of October, and I thought I'd say a few words about working with multiple operating systems. And in this respect, it's worth noting that here in Raspberry Pi OS, we look in the menu and accessories. There's a couple of very useful utilities available in this respect. One is Raspberry Pi Imager, which as you probably know is used for downloading and writing operating systems to appropriate drives. I used this earlier in the week for writing Ubuntu to an external SSD, selecting Pi 5 there, and then other general purpose OS, Ubuntu and Ubuntu 22.10. And then I selected my external SSD, still currently connected, and clicked on Next. I won't click on it Next again now because I want to keep Ubuntu on my external USB SSD. Anyway, the other very useful utility here is what's called SD card copier, but this is actually a utility for cloning operating system drives. So for example, we could pick the internal SSD here, our NVMe SSD, and we could clone it to an external USB drive. And again, I'm not going to do that, but I just wanted to show you this is available. This is a very useful utility indeed. Finally, I thought it was worth pointing out how I've been switching between operating systems this week. You can use software called FydeOS to install multiple operating systems on one drive on a Raspberry Pi. I've got a video on my channel about that. But what I've been doing is using the Pi's boot drive select. And for that, all we need to do is to shut down. So let's shut down the system and go to reboot. We'll now go into Ubuntu. What I'm now going to do though is to hold down the spacebar. And as you can see, this gets us to a boot selection screen, where, as you can see, if I press 4, we can boot from USB, which here will be Ubuntu. And here we are arriving in Ubuntu. I'll just log in. Can I get my password right? I can, it looks like I can. And we're arriving in Ubuntu. Come on, Ubuntu. Hello, Ubuntu. Always nice to arrive in Ubuntu. Very different look and feel to Raspberry Pi OS. But if I want to go back to Raspberry Pi OS, I could just reverse the process, do another reboot like that, and restart. And here I won't press spacebar to select the operating system on boot, because by default the Pi will boot from the NVMe SSD unless it had an SD card in the system, which it currently doesn't, so it'll arrive straight back into Raspberry Pi OS. And oh look, that's exactly what happened. Again, I'll put in my password. And once again, I've managed to get it correct. And so there we are. You've seen how I've been working this week with multiple operating systems. Well, we've reached Sunday and my Pi 500 plus week is now drawing towards a successful conclusion. And to that end, I've even started working on some video thumbnails. It might be that, might be this, might be something entirely different. And because it's Sunday, a new Explaining Computers video has just uploaded, the one about switching to 5G broadband. And so already I am checking out the analytics. Here they are, seeing how the video is doing, and that's doing okay for its first half an hour. And as always, I'm also going to be spending quite a bit of time this afternoon responding to comments here in the comments section. But before I get engrossed in YouTube Studio and obsessed with analytics, as I always do on a Sunday afternoon, I thought I'd draw a few conclusions. And the first point I'd make is that across this week, I haven't felt significantly constrained by available computing resources. And this has surprised me, given we've only got 4 A76 2.4 GHz ARM Cortex cores in a Pi 500 Plus, but video editing has been efficient, using proxies admittedly, but it's worked perfectly fine. And web apps, not least including YouTube Studio, which is often quite demanding in terms of resources, have been very responsive. So that's been very good. That's not something I expected at the start of the week. This said, my second point is that I think we have to acknowledge that everything I've done this week on the Pi 500 Plus, I could have done on an x86 mini PC, and x86 mini PCs with something like an M100 or M150 processor plus a keyboard are often cheaper than the Pi 500 Plus. And that does beg the question, why would you choose to use a computer like this, or even a Raspberry Pi 5 plus an NVMe SSD in the case and all that stuff? Why would you choose to use this computer rather than a cheaper x86 mini PC, which I do know from previous videos has got better performance? And the answer to that, and the final thing I'd say here, is that something you do get from a Pi 500 Plus is a very intangible thing. It is a very good computing experience. This is a very nice computer to use, and it's partially because it's a novel form factor, it's interesting, it's different, It's partially because it's silent, it's partially because of the build quality, which is very good indeed, beautiful keyboard, but it's somehow more than that. This is just a nice thing to use, and that I think is going to be increasingly important when we think about doing general computing on something like a Pi 500 Plus, where it's not competing terribly well in terms of price performance with the cheapest x86 mini PCs, but it is a great computing experience. And that's, I think, very much my final conclusion from this week. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.